Welcome back to the Seaboard Central, everyone, in the 2024 layout tour video. I'm Tim Garland, the owner and builder of the Seaboard Central and your tour guide for today's video. A lot of cool things have happened over the past year, so without further ado, let's get started. All right, to start the tour, we'll look at the workshop first, and this is where I store equipment and some supplies. Right next to it is a workbench where I can do some tune-ups and some upgrades. And next to that is the airbrush booth where I can vent it to the outside through that window. Underneath the ADM module is another workbench where I do programming and I do some weathering. If we keep panning to the left, you'll start seeing the beginning of the layout here at Gadson Yard. And we'll start the layout tour here at this end of Gadson Yard, and you see 5 tracks that will end up going through the backdrop. And this will allow some double-ended tracks. They'll be located under the Carrollton, Georgia section of the layout, located in the adjacent room. So Gadson Yard itself is at 32 inches deep from the front edge of the fascia to the backdrop and around 15 feet long. It contains 14 tracks, a passing siding to main line, and tracks 1 through 12. A couple of my goals for 2025 are to power all these switches that are in the yard and also scenic the layout, including ballasting the tracks. So on this end of the yard, you can see the employee parking lot along with Gadson Main Tower, and that's where the yard master, the train masters reside. Next to that is the sand track where they can spot sand and biodiesel for the locomotives. And then you have Ready Track 1 and Ready Track 2, and this is where they actually sand the locomotives and put fuel in them along with engine coolant, and they can empty the toilet reservoirs and fill that back up. The next 2 tracks are Shop 1 and 2. That's where they work on locomotives that need repair. And the track beyond that is ST's rail service, and that's where I can send cars in for any type of repair work along with upgrades. And they may go in looking like a brand new car and come out looking all weathered. Here you see 4th Street going over 3 tracks into the backdrop. All my backdrops are done by Trackside Scenery. You can check all his offerings out at tracksidescenery.com. One thing railroaders do is they like to name tracks. This first track right here is the main line. The second track is called the freight lead, and the third track is called the thoroughfare. Here you can see the tracks coming together at what I'm calling AC Junction for Alabama City Junction. This first track again is the main line. You have a crossover going over to the freight lead. And then you have the thoroughfare, and this comes into main line number 2, where I have a pair of tracks going up a helix. But before we get to that, there's a track that goes back through there that goes to the NS Interchange and the team track. So let's check it out. Scenicing and detailing this part of the layout was kind of an afterthought, but I'm glad I did it. And this allows for a team track where a track supervisor receives company material along with the NS Interchange where you see those 2 NS locomotives located. Since I knew this scene would be dark, I lit this up with the Woodland Scenics lighting kit. And I have a switch located right here on the fascia so I can turn them off when I'm not using it. Here's where the NS, I'll be able to store the NS transfer run on a pair of tracks that will go underneath phase 2 and the next part of the layout. So one of the big projects I did for 2024 is construct this Helix. And this Helix is a kit that's offered by TracksideScenery.com, the same people that do my backdrops. And it's made from a gator board type material, and it's super simple to construct. I just used some super glue and a razor blade along with a gradient tool that I bought off of Amazon to try to maintain a 1.8% grade. It's a double track Helix. He offers them in different sizes. For this particular kit, the inside radius is a 31-inch radius curve, and the outside radius is a 33-inch radius curve. Now here's the section that I'm currently working on. This is where the Helix is connected to the upper level. And you can see I just added some photo backdrops from trackside scenery here. And I've got the track in place along with, I did some ballasting. I still need to tweak that up and blend that backdrop in to the rest of the scenery. Now this is a duck under and it's set at 54 inches off the floor. And right here, I'm going to have an overpass bridge that I'm currently working on. Should be a pretty cool scene. Now here's where the duck under connects to the existing part of the layout that was featured in last year's layout tour video. This is Ragland, and the industry you see there in the back is National Cement. Now this is another industry that I hope to work on during 2025 and adding a whole lot more details to. There's a lot that can be added here that really make this industry pop. So I'm looking forward to that. Next up is State Route 144, which crosses over the tracks here, and the crossing signals are made by We Honest, company I found off of eBay. And right next to it is the old Ragland Depot, which has seen better days. Right next to the Ragland Depot is where the signal maintainer has some equipment stored inside that chain link fence, along with the track department who has some track material stored alongside the tracks. Now all the turnouts on the upper level are controlled by New Rail Models Blue Point switch machines, and they're operated with these push-pull knobs that are located on the side of the fascia. So one cool detail I thought I'd add here is an old switch. And I see this a lot on the railroad where a turnout's been replaced and they'll just push the old one out of the way. And here you see it just growing in the weeds around it. And also, here's a stack of rail. Now, on the railroad during the winter months, a lot of times when the temperature changes, the rails will crack and they need those replacement rails to go in its place. Now, not every square foot of your model railroad should have track and industries located in it. And this was one area where I knew I wanted to do something different. So back in this corner of the layout, I created a swamp in the middle of the woods. And this was such a fun scene to make. I did a whole series on how I created that. You can find on the channel if you want to follow along each step of the way that I made this scene. Now I'm going to zoom in on this scene because legend has it a Bigfoot lives back here. And if you've got really good eyes, you may actually see a creature back there in the woods. Such a fun scene to do. Now here you're looking at Ragland Yard, and this part of the layout is only 10 inches deep. It's got 4 tracks, the 2 yard tracks, a main line, and a runaround track that's next to the backdrop. And this, I treat the 2 tracks here along the fascia as the staging yard for traffic going and coming from Birmingham, Alabama off the BNSF and the CSX. On this end of Ragland Yard, you can see the switch going into ADM, which it has the tracks that goes through the backdrop there, and we'll check that out in a minute. But before we do, we can look at the track supervisor's office right here on this end of the yard, along with some equipment that they use to work on the tracks in this part of the railroad. Here's another view of the track supervisor's office looking down at it from a different angle. And if you look closely in the parking area, you can see some mud puddles from a recent rain. And this also gives you a chance to look at the difference between the main line and those 2 yard tracks. And you can see the difference in the color and texture. And that's one thing model railroaders we always strive to work at is color and texture. Also, you notice that the cross ties have different colors because that shows that they get changed out at different time periods. They don't all get changed out at once. And another thing you'll see is some material in between the tracks where it spilled out of some of the cars. Now this end of Ragland Yard is where the yard tracks go back into the main line. And this section of the layout over the bridge here is only 6 inches deep. But it gave me an actual escape track for my locomotives coming out of the yard onto the main. And here you see the end of the line on the upper level. And this bridge, this exact rail bridge that goes over Trout Creek, is actually the first bridge I've done because I didn't have a bridge on my first layout. And the end of the track has an overpass bridge to disguise it. This track is long enough for about 4 locomotives, which is enough to get out of the yard and run around their train. Here's another view of the Trout Creek Bridge, and you can see where that photo backdrop really comes in handy when you're talking about a narrow scene like this. And for me, I actually prefer a photo backdrop versus a painted backdrop for this particular reason. It really expands the depth of your scenes. It looks like it keeps going on when it's done correctly. And I can't say enough good things about trackside scenery and their offerings that they have for photo backdrops. And you can just see how well that scene has been blended in, and it just looks great. One more thing about the backdrops, I knew I needed a road at the end of this bridge, and I was able to measure out exactly where I needed it, and he was able to place it there so it'd line up just right. And so here you're looking at it, the end of the line from another angle. Now here's where the ADM lead comes through the backdrop. And on this corner of the layout, I wanted to put an old abandoned vacant house up in there. I thought it would be pretty cool to add. You see some junk cars out there and just Mother Nature taking back over this scene. Now ADM is the largest industry on the layout, and they produce ethanol here. And this track in the back is where they hold the tank cars. Those 3 are just waiting to be spotted. They're just hanging out there on the tank track lead. And then you see 3 under the loading area, the loading docks. And this is where they turn the corn into ethanol. The 3 tracks next to the fascia is the storage yard. Then you have 2 tracks that unload the corn, and the track where the switcher is they actually load out DDG, or distilled dried grains. Now another detail you can notice here is all the oil and grease droppings that happens when you have a switch engine that goes back and forth over the same section of track all the time. They do drop a lot of stuff, and you'll see evidence of it in the track, so I wanted to show that here. The entire ADM module is exactly 2 foot by 8 foot long, and it consists of all micro engineering code 70 track, along with number 5 turnouts. It's just an overview of it. This was a wonderful place to start the layout because it allowed me to have operations going very soon, very quickly. Such a fun industry to switch. It's a layout in itself. So I hope you've enjoyed this 2024 layout tour of the Seaboard Central, and if you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up. It helps the layout be exposed to people that may not know about it. And also, if you're not already a subscriber, I'd invite you to join. I do try to release a video every Sunday. So until next time, I'm Tim Garland. Thanks for watching the Seaboard Central, and happy model railroading.